Sarah was driving down the road to Maplewood. Sarah's hands tightened on the steering wheel as she drove down the familiar winding road, framed by tall, gnarled oaks. It had been 10 years since she'd last set foot in Maplewood, her childhood town, but the memories were vivid. Ice cream on summer afternoons, bike races down Main Street, and the way the town always smelled faintly of lilacs. Her return wasn't a choice. After her mother passed away, Sarah had received an unsettling call from the estate lawyer. "You should come back and see for yourself." The cryptic message gnawed at her as the GPS announced she was only a mile away. But as Sarah rounded the final bend, her stomach dropped. The road didn't lead to Maplewood, it led to emptiness. The town was gone. Where once there were neat rows of clapboard houses and shops, now lay a vast, barren field. No roads, no buildings, just tall grass swaying under a gray sky. Sarah slammed on the brakes, her heart pounding as disbelief gave way to panic. She got out of the car and stepped onto the grass. The air was heavy and strangely silent. Not even birdsong broke the stillness. Her phone showed no signal. She walked forward, scanning for any sign of what had been there. "This can't be real," she muttered, her voice swallowed by the void. Sarah reached the spot where the town square should have been, where she'd spent countless weekends with her best friend Emma, feeding ducks at the fountain. But there was no fountain, no cobblestone paths, no anything. Just the faint impression of what might have been footsteps in the dirt. Her first thought was to drive back to the nearest town and ask for help. But something compelled her to keep walking. She wasn't sure why, but it felt like Maplewood was still here, just hidden. After hours of wandering, she came across a strange object. Half buried in the earth was a rusted sign, its letters barely legible. "Welcome to Maplewood, population 3,219. The sign felt colder than it should have in her hands, and as she touched it, a whisper brushed past her ear. "You came back." Sarah spun around, heart racing. The field was still empty, but the air had shifted. It felt heavier, as if the entire area was holding its breath. "You shouldn't have," the voice whispered again. "Who's there?" Sarah called, trying to keep her voice steady. But there was no reply, only the wind. As twilight descended, Sarah began to see faint lights in the distance. At first she thought they were fireflies, but they moved too purposefully, flickering and bobbing in a strange rhythm. Against her better judgment, she followed them. The lights led her to a grove of trees that hadn't been there before. In the center of the grove stood a weathered gazebo. It was the only structure she had seen since arriving, and yet, she remembered it vividly. It was where her parents had danced on their anniversary years ago. Stepping inside the gazebo, Sarah felt a wave of dizziness. The world around her shimmered like a heat mirage, and suddenly, she was no longer alone. The townspeople were there, their faces pale and their eyes vacant. They moved in a loop, repeating the same actions over and over. Children playing with invisible toys, shopkeepers arranging goods on non-existent shelves. "Maplewood never left," a voice said behind her. Sarah turned to see Emma, or at least something that looked like Emma. Her face was sharper, her eyes too wide and filled with an unnatural glow. "What happened here?" Sarah demanded, her voice shaking. "We made a choice," Emma said, her tone eerily calm. The town was dying, people were leaving, businesses closing. But then they came. "Who?" Emma didn't answer. Instead, she pointed to the horizon where the shadows had begun to shift. In the distance, figures moved, tall, indistinct shapes that seemed to blend with the darkness itself. "They offered us a way to stay," Emma continued, "to preserve Maplewood forever. But the cost was everything." Sarah's heart pounded. "And now, what happens to me?" Emma's lips curved into a sad smile. "You're part of it now. You came back." The shadows drew closer, their presence pressing against Sarah's mind like a weight she couldn't bear. She tried to run, but the field stretched endlessly in every direction. As the first shadow reached her, a strange calm washed over her. The memories of Maplewood, the lilac scent, the fountain, the laughter, flooded her senses. And then, there was nothing. The next day, a passing traveler stopped on the road where Maplewood should have been. They stared at the vast, empty field, confused by the faint sound of laughter carried on the wind. Maplewood was gone, but not entirely.